Welcome to Crying Inside, where we share true family stories filled with tears but also strength and hope. If you're new to the channel, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories, because here each story is not just a tale but a mirror for anyone who's experienced similar pain. Some children grow up not fearing the dark, thunder, or monsters under the bed, but they fear the cold stare from the very person who gave them life. Some children, when hurt, instinctively run to their mother, only to be met with silence or worse, an indifferent look as if they never existed. The story you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's true, told from the perspective of a daughter erased from the family's picture of love. She once believed that silence was the way to survive, that if she was good enough, small enough, and grateful enough, she would be loved. But harsh reality made her realize, silence never protects you. It just slowly consumes you. Today, I will tell you that story. The story begins at 3 a.m. when I lay on the floor, my leg broken, blood flowing from my mouth, and saw my mother just standing there. 3 a.m. A small house in the Cleveland suburbs is wrapped in silence. Outside the window, wind whistles through the trees. Streetlights cast a faint yellow glow, patchy on the empty street. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of alcohol, cigarettes, and sweat. On the living room floor, Emily Parker lies motionless, her body curled up, hair matted with sweat and blood. A dark red stream trickles from the corner of her mouth, running down her neck, soaking into the faded carpet. Her left leg is bent at an unnatural angle, the bones seeming ready to pierce the bruised skin. She breathes heavily, each breath uneven, painful, and choked. Every time she tries to move, a sharp pain shoots through her body, making Emily cry out. But what she fears more than the physical pain is the eyes watching her. Linda, Emily's mother, stands in the hallway doorway. She wears a light blue robe, tied tightly at the waist. Her arms crossed over her chest, face cold, eyes indifferent. She looked at her daughter as if she were a stranger. No panic, no tears, just a calmness that made Emily feel more suffocated than any blow ever could. "Mom, please help me," Emily tried to call out, her voice hoarse, each word breaking, her eyes pleading. Linda stood there, unmoving, just lightly tapping her foot in the fabric slipper on the carpet, each tap steady and indifferent. A loud noise came from behind. Richard Miller, Emily's stepfather, stumbled out of the kitchen. The strong smell of alcohol rose from his breath and his wrinkled shirt. His face flushed red from the booze and anger. Bloodshot eyes, breath heavy and quick. He still held a half-empty beer can. Beer spilled across the floor. "Troublemaker," he growled, then suddenly kicked Emily hard in the ribs. The sound of bones crashing echoed chillingly. Emily screamed, the sound tearing through the silence of the house. The pain stole her breath away. Her small body curled up, her vision blurred. Richard took a long breath, wiped sweat from his forehead, then turned and walked away, as if it was just an ordinary task done. He passed right by Linda without a glance, went upstairs, leaving the room with just mother and daughter. Emily still held on to a fragile hope. She looked up, sobbing, "Mom, it hurts so much. Please help me." Linda stepped closer. Her shadow stretched long across the floor, covering Emily's face stained with blood and tears. Emily thought at last her mother would kneel down, reach out, and hold her like she used to. But Linda just bowed her head, slightly leaned forward, lips pressed tight, then whispered, just loud enough for Emily to hear, "You should sign those papers, Emily." In that moment, Emily's heart shattered. Richard's kick broke her bones, but it was her mother's cold words that pierced her soul like a knife. Every last bit of trust, every hope that motherly love would save her, crumbled. Emily's gaze darkened. Her heavy breathing slowly faded. In a haze, she still saw her mother turn and walk away, calm as if nothing had happened. And at that very moment, Emily understood. The deepest wound in her life didn't come from the blow, but from the absolute silence of the mother who chose to watch. Emily Parker, 24 years old, was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. Her life is clearly divided into two halves. The first half is warm, brief memories with her biological father, Mark Parker, a gentleman who loved his daughter deeply. The second half is long, dark days that began when he died in a car accident when Emily was only 5 years old. Mark's passing left a huge void in the family. Emily was too young to understand what permanent loss meant, but she clearly remembers her father's warm hand holding hers as they crossed the street. She remembers how he would laugh out loud every time he lifted her up high. Those few memories became the only pieces that kept her feeling loved. When Emily was 8, her mother Linda remarried Richard Miller. That's when her life took a different turn. From the day Richard came into the house, the warm space Emily knew disappeared. Photos of her with her father slowly stopped appearing on the walls. Stories about him were replaced by silence, or sometimes just her mother's head shaking. Emily gradually felt like she was being erased from the family's memories. To outsiders, Richard was a successful man, hardworking and caring towards his wife. But behind closed doors, he showed his true self, a violent, hot-tempered man, always looking for reasons to yell. Emily was just a thorn in his side, a reminder of a past he wanted Linda to bury. Instead of protecting her daughter, Linda stayed silent. Many times she sided with Richard, treating Emily like a burden. A mother's hug became a rare luxury from then on. Whenever Emily ran to her, Linda would gently push her away, or coldly tell her to be better, to listen more. But Emily kept trying. Throughout school, she stayed at the top of her class, loved reading, joined the drama team, and earned praise from her teachers. Once, her homeroom teacher called Emily the pride of the class. But that pride was never mentioned by her mother. Linda never attended award ceremonies, nor did she ever put certificates up on the wall. Everything related to Emily disappeared in that house, as if she never existed. Her mother's coldness became an invisible wound. Emily always longed for a look of approval, a compliment, or even just a comforting hug, but all she got was emptiness and indifference. She began to learn how to suppress her feelings, telling herself that if she tried harder, her mother would change. If she was good enough, smart enough, quiet enough, her mother would love her like before, but that never happened. Whenever Emily's teachers invited her mother to school, Linda often made excuses about being busy. On the rare occasions she did show up, she sat silently with an icy face, no smiles, no photos, no praise. On the way home, instead of congratulations, Linda just said coldly, "Don't get too full of yourself, Emily." Emily gradually felt like a ghost in her own home. During family dinners, when Richard shared work stories and Linda listened attentively, Emily sat quietly, trying to make herself as small as possible. She didn't want to draw attention or cause trouble. Deep down, she just wanted her mother to turn around and ask a simple question. "How was your day?" But that question never came. When she reached high school, Emily started keeping a journal, not to record happy moments, but to hold on to what was left of herself. Each page was the only place she dared to reveal her sadness, fears, and small dreams. In those pages, one phrase repeated over and over. "One day, Mom will really see me." But as she grew older, Emily realized the painful truth. Linda never wanted to see her. Motherly love was not the reason she kept Emily in that house. The only thing Linda cared about was keeping peace with Richard, and Emily was just an obstacle. Emily's heart was torn apart by this. On one hand, she craved her mother's love. On the other, she slowly understood it would never come. This contradiction made Emily vulnerable, clinging to faint hopes even though she knew the end would only be disappointment. At 24, Emily was no longer the innocent child waiting for her mother to save her. But deep inside, she was still that child, always hoping to hear her mother call her name with love in her voice. And that's what broke her on that fateful night, when she begged her birth mother for salvation, but received only a cold whisper in return. In Emily's memory, major holidays in the U.S. were always the times she felt the most alone. In Cleveland, winter arrives with the bustling spirit of Thanksgiving and Christmas. Most families in the neighborhood prepare festive tables, decorate their homes, and take commemorative photos. But in Linda and Richard's house, everything was always kept in strict order. In that order, Emily had no place. On Thanksgiving, the smell of roasted turkey filled the entire house. Richard sat at the head of the table, Linda was busy with side dishes, and Nate, her half-brother, was favored with a seat right beside them. Every year, they took family photos around the table, raising wine glasses with wide smiles. But Emily was usually left standing outside the frame, or sitting in the farthest chair, hidden behind Richard's shoulder. Some years, she wasn't even called into the living room and had to eat leftovers in the kitchen. The picture hanging in the living room always included everyone except her. Christmas was no different. The tall Christmas tree, glowing brightly, stood right in the middle of the living room, with neatly arranged gift boxes, underneath each bearing Nate's name, along with Linda's and Richard's. Only Emily's name was missing. The only gifts she usually got were a cheap pair of socks or a hastily bought notebook, but what hurt Emily the most was the look in her mother's eyes when handing her those gifts. No joy, no warmth, just obligation. At school, when friends excitedly talked about prom, what dress to wear, and who would ask whom, Emily stayed silent. She didn't dare say she wouldn't get money from her mother for a dress, nor did she have anyone to give her a ride to the dance. That prom night, while her friends danced under sparkling lights, Emily sat alone in a small room, wearing an old shirt, opening her diary, and writing that she too deserved to be happy. Graduation day was supposed to be a milestone. Emily had studied hard, overcoming every obstacle to stand on stage and receive her diploma, but when she looked down at the audience, the 2 seats reserved for her mother and stepfather were empty. Linda said she was busy, and Richard didn't even bother to give a reason. Emily stood among her friends. Everyone else had family photos, but she only had one, hastily taken by a classmate, her face forcing a smile while her eyes looked empty. The Miller family's living room wall was called the family wall. It was covered with memories, from Florida vacation pictures, summer BBQ parties, to Nate's academic awards. There was a photo of Richard dressed in a suit at a work awards ceremony. There was a photo of Linda beaming at a birthday party. There was a photo of Nate standing on stage during a piano recital. But there wasn't a single photo of Emily after 5th grade. Her face disappeared, as if her life stopped at childhood, and her growing up was not worth mentioning. A few times, Emily stood in front of that wall, trying to find any trace of herself, but all she saw was emptiness. The wall didn't reflect her youth at all. It only confirmed that in this family, Emily didn't belong. In America, people often talk about the family portrait as an important way to preserve memories. But for Emily, her memories had been selectively erased by others. With every passing holiday, every new photo hung up, she felt herself pushed further away from the idea of family. That absence wasn't just in the photo, the gift, or the empty chair at graduation. It gradually took root in Emily's heart as a feeling of being completely rejected. And that's what made her, for many years, live like someone standing outside the American family wall, quietly watching from afar, knowing she would never be allowed inside. Emily never forgot that day. It was her senior year of high school, and she was preparing for a future she believed would finally let her escape that suffocating home. For years, Emily studied hard and signed up for every extracurricular activity she could debate: team, literature, club, community volunteering. She always believed that if she tried her best, one day the college door would open and take her far away. The good news came unexpectedly on a spring afternoon. Her homeroom teacher called Emily to the office and handed her an envelope stamped with the State Scholarship Council's seal. Emily tremblingly opened it. Inside was a congratulatory letter. She had won a full scholarship to a prestigious university in Chicago. Tuition, dorm fees, books, everything was covered. With that scholarship, Emily could start a new life, one without Richard, without her mother's cold gaze. Emily held the letter in her hands, feeling like she had just touched a dream. She rushed home, eager to share the good news. But when she walked in, Linda just glanced at the paper, folded it, and put it on the table, as if it were just a regular bill. No congratulations, no hug. Just a cold, indifferent look that left Emily disappointed. On the official application submission day, Emily had to provide a copy of her birth certificate to complete the process. She rummaged through the drawer in her mother's room. When she opened it, she froze. The birth certificate was ivory white, but under the father's name, it wasn't Mark Parker, as she always knew. Instead, the name clearly printed was Richard Miller. Emily was stunned. Her hand trembled, holding the paper. "No way. This has to be a mistake," she whispered. Then she ran down to the living room to confront Linda. "Mom, what is this?" "My dad is Mark. Why does this say Richard?" Emily's voice cracked, confused and angry. Linda looked up from her coffee cup, her face calm like nothing was wrong. "Don't be dramatic. This is just a formality. You don't need to worry about it." "Formality? This is my identity. This is my father. Why did you change it?" Emily shouted, tears streaming. Linda put down her coffee, looking at her daughter with cold eyes. "You won't understand. It's best if you just stay quiet and listen." That answer explained nothing. It only made Emily's pain deeper. She felt like her whole life had been erased, as if her real father never existed. The next day, Emily submitted her scholarship application with the new birth certificate. She was worried but still believed everything would be fine. But a few weeks later, a letter arrived. The scholarship committee announced that her application was invalid due to inconsistencies in the documents. The scholarship was revoked. The university door she once reached for slammed shut in an instant. Emily held the letter in her hands and sat down hard on the floor. Tears streamed down endlessly, not because she lost the scholarship, but because she realized the person who took that chance away was her own mother. Linda not only stayed silent in the face of pain, she actively took away her daughter's future. That night, when Emily asked again, Linda replied calmly, "You can't handle it. I'm just protecting you from disappointment." Emily stared at her mother, unable to believe what she had just heard. Protecting me from disappointment? Or does she just want to keep me close so it's easier to control me, so I can never break free? That night, Emily sat in her room, the crumpled scholarship letter in her hand. Outside the window, the dim streetlight cast a pale glow into the small room. She knew her life was stepping into a new chapter. A dark chapter where she had to accept that her mother was no longer a place to lean on. Her mother had become the biggest barrier, wiping away both her past and her future. That was the first knot. The moment Emily realized she wasn't just abandoned during holidays or in family photos, but erased from her own life. After the shock of losing the scholarship, Emily still tried to keep going to school, though her heart was heavy with doubt and injustice. Richard's abuse never stopped. It only grew worse whenever he got angry, over work, or drunk. Bruises on her arms, purple marks on her neck, even times she had to wrap scarves to hide red welts on her skin. One day, when the wounds were too obvious to hide, Emily decided to break her silence. She went to the school counselor's office, a woman named Mrs. Sanders, known for caring about her students. Emily sat across from the wooden desk, trembling hands, her voice choked as she recounted what had happened at home. She spoke about the slaps, the kicks, the times she was thrown to the floor. She believed that at least here she would be heard. Mrs. Sanders initially listened very carefully, her eyes showing clear worry. "Emily, you don't deserve to go through this. I will report this and help you." Those words gave Emily a glimmer of hope, a hope that finally the truth would come to light. But that belief shattered after just one day. Linda showed up at the school, in front of the principal and Mrs. Sanders. She cried, her voice trembling, saying that Emily had mental health issues since she was little, that the death of her biological father left wounds, causing her to imagine things that weren't real. Linda spoke like a worried mother, saying her daughter was just trying to get attention. "She's making everything up. She needs therapy, not a police report." Linda choked up, wiping tears with a tissue, her shoulders shaking as if in deep pain. Those present seemed to believe her. Richard was not there, and Emily had no concrete evidence except for bruises that Linda skillfully explained away as accidents, sports injuries, or self-inflicted. Emily sat in the room, listening to her mother speak, her heart feeling crushed. She tried to argue back, but every word she said only made the principal believe Linda was right. The label mentally unstable stuck to her like an invisible, heavy tag that was hard to shake off. The outcome of that meeting was that Emily wasn't protected. Instead, she was excluded from many activities she loved. She had been a strong candidate for class president, but the council skipped her name, saying they needed someone more stable. She had been an active member of the poetry team, where she poured her feelings into every word, but after the meeting she was removed without explanation. The editing club, where she had been in charge of the literature section, quietly replaced her with someone else. Emily walked down the school hallways, feeling the scrutinizing eyes of her classmates. Some whispered behind her back, calling her a drama queen, someone who exaggerated everything. Friends who had once been close gradually avoided her, worried that being close to Emily would make them seem like they had problems too. At home that evening, Emily looked at her mother, trying to find some explanation, but Linda just coldly said, "You should know when to keep quiet. That's the only way to keep the peace." "No one will believe you, Emily." That night, Emily sat in her room, the desk lamp casting a pale light on her face. In her journal she wrote, "Maybe I really am the problem. Maybe I'm just making everything worse. If I stay silent, maybe things will be easier for everyone." That was when Emily's first conflict erupted. She had the courage to speak up, but her own mother shut her down. And instead of being protected, she was pushed away from everything she loved. That pressure made Emily start believing she was a burden. From then on, Emily gradually withdrew. She spoke less, smiled less, and avoided people's eyes. At school, she sat quietly in the corner, taking notes. At home, she avoided Richard and kept absolutely silent. Inside, Emily carried a toxic belief that she was the cause of all the chaos, that her existence only made others suffer. And that belief slowly turned her into a shadow, even in her own world. It all started on an evening that seemed ordinary. Richard walked into the living room, holding a stack of papers. He didn't look drunk like usual. Instead, he seemed very clear-headed. Linda sat nearby, her cold, familiar gaze paired with a fake sweet tone. "Emily," Richard began, his tone more like an order than a request. "We're about to buy a new house. A better, bigger place. And to do that, we need your signature. You just need to sign here. It's just a formality." Emily looked at the papers. Bold letters read, "Loan agreement." Her heart sank. She knew very well that once she signed, her name would be tied to the huge debt Richard wanted to take on. A debt she had nothing to do with, but that would bind her life. She shook her head. "Number, I can't sign. This is not my responsibility." Linda immediately interrupted, her voice full of familiar reproach. "Emily, you should be grateful to help the family. For so many years, Richard has raised me and paid for my education. Now is the time to repay him. Or do you think you can live out there all alone with no one backing you up?" Emily felt her chest tighten. From childhood to adulthood, she never once heard a word of approval from her mother. And now, the only thing her mother expects is her signature on a debt paper. She looked at her mother, searching for a spark of warmth, but only saw a cold stare. "I won't sign," Emily replied, her voice trembling but firm. The room fell into an icy silence. Richard stood up, his face flushed red, eyes flashing with anger. "Who do you think you are? Living under my roof and daring to defy me?" Before Emily could step back, his rough hand struck her face. The slap echoed through the quiet night. Emily fell, her head hitting the wooden floor hard. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, the metallic taste flooding her throat. Linda didn't step forward to help her daughter. She just stood there with arms crossed. "Emily, you're only making things worse. If you sign, everything will be fine. But you're choosing the hard way." Richard continued to vent his rage. He kicked Emily's leg hard. A sharp crack sounded. The pain tore through her body, making her scream before fading into choked sobs. The clock on the wall showed exactly 3 in the morning. Darkness surrounded her. But for Emily, the scariest thing wasn't the night, it was her mother's indifferent eyes standing there. Lying on the floor, Emily saw blood spreading across the carpet. Her breath grew shallow. In that moment, she realized a harsh truth. If she kept silent, one day she would die in silence, with no one knowing she ever existed. Linda bent down, whispering just loud enough for Emily to hear. "If you sign, it'll all be over. Just one signature." But in pain, Emily still shook her head, her eyes blurred with tears, but a new awareness stirred in her mind. This wasn't about signing or not signing anymore. This was a matter of survival. Either she fought back, or she would lose everything, even her life. The pain from the broken leg spread throughout her body, but it became a powerful reminder. For the first time, Emily realized that silence wouldn't protect her. Silence only made her disappear slowly, under the hands of abuse and her own mother's indifference. In that moment, a small flame ignited inside her. It wasn't strong enough to save her right away, but it was enough to plant a new thought. Emily had to find a way out of this cycle, no matter what. That night, outside the window, the wind howled through the trees in a Cleveland suburb. Inside the house, a young girl lay motionless on the floor, blood staining, bones broken and aching, with a soul just waking up after years of being crushed. When she woke up in the hospital, Emily felt like her body was heavy as lead. Her left leg was in a cast. The wound on her lip was stitched up, and beside the bed stood a nurse taking notes. Emily wanted to tell everything, to say that Richard had hit her, that her mother just watched, but then her throat tightened. Memories from before flooded back. When she had gone to the school counselor to report it, everyone had turned their backs, believing Linda's fake tears and Richard's lies. She looked toward the door, where a police officer had just walked in. He asked calmly, as if it were just a normal family accident, "Did you fall down the stairs, Emily?" That question felt like a knife twisting in her heart. Emily stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Because she knew if she told the truth, they'd call her unstable, a child making things up to rebel against her family. When discharged from the hospital, Emily quietly packed her things. She deleted her mother's number from her contacts and blocked all channels of communication. For the first time in her life, she decided to cut the ties that had bound her for so long. But inside, there was still a sharp emptiness. She had once longed for her mother's love, hoped for a hug, a word of protection. Now, instead of love, all that remained were memories of silence and betrayal. Emily began to write. In a thick notebook, she recorded every detail, every event that had happened. She called it the Truth File. The first page was the story of the lost full scholarship because her birth certificate had been altered. The second page is about the meeting with the school counselor, where her mother cried and falsely accused her of being mentally unstable. The following pages record the blows, the insults, the times, blood seeped from her lips, and bruises covered her body. Every time she wrote, her hands trembled, but her heart felt lighter. For the first time, Emily was no longer silent. Though she hadn't told anyone yet, the notebook was proof that the truth still existed, that she wasn't crazy, and her memories couldn't be erased. One evening, while cleaning her room, Emily accidentally found something strange under the bookshelf. It was a small camera, cleverly hidden, and pointed straight at her bed. She froze. In that moment, every hair on the back of her neck stood up. The feeling of being watched made her choke up. Richard had invaded the deepest parts of her privacy. She took the camera off, her hands trembling. The device still had a blinking red light, showing it was still on. Emily covered her face, tears streaming down. No doubt anymore, this was not just physical abuse, but total control. Amid the fear, a thought flickered. If Richard was bold enough to do this, maybe he had other secrets yet to be revealed. Emily was both terrified and determined. She couldn't let this continue. If she stayed silent, her life would forever be in the hands of her abuser. She put the camera in a box, marking it as evidence. Then she kept writing in the truth file. She wrote that Richard had been monitoring her with the camera and that Linda knew but stayed silent. Each page was a statement, a vow that one day everything would come to light. In the days after, Emily lived in constant fear. Every time she entered a room, she scanned every corner, flipped through every item to make sure there were no other cameras. Footsteps in the night made her jump. The soft sound of a door opening made her heart tighten. But mixed with the fear was a growing determination. Emily started reading books about the law, about how to protect victims of domestic abuse. She researched women's shelters in Ohio, noting addresses and phone numbers in her notebook. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, because Linda and Richard always knew how to manipulate others. But this time, she was no longer the child forced to stay silent. One night, looking in the mirror, Emily saw her eyes swollen and red, her face pale from lack of sleep. But deep inside, those eyes were no longer completely hopeless. There was a small spark, like a flickering candle in a dark room. And Emily knew that spark was her desire to live truthfully, to be free. The conflict was no longer just within the family. It had become an internal battle. Emily had to fight her own fears, the memory that every time she spoke up, no one believed her. But she understood clearly that if she stayed silent again, her whole life would be erased from the family picture, just like the photos on the wall where she hadn't appeared since 5th grade. In the last pages of her journal that month, Emily wrote a vow. I will not disappear. I will not be erased. The truth must be seen. Emily's room was swallowed by darkness. The night lamp cast a faint light on the old desk where she sat trembling, holding scattered sheets of paper in her hands. These weren't ordinary papers. They were letters, scribbled notes from her biological father, Mark Parker, the man she once thought had abandoned her when she was only 5. But every word in those letters proved otherwise. Emily, Daddy misses you so much. One day, we will go to the lake again, just you and me. Those lines made her heart ache. Tears spilled onto the pages, smudging the words. Emily couldn't believe her eyes. For years, Linda had told her that her father didn't care anymore, that he was just a meaningless figure from the past. But these letters were living proof that Mark had never turned his back. He was still watching over her, still trying to send messages to his daughter, before fate closed his life in an accident. The way Emily found these letters was just as unexpected. One afternoon, she ran into Mr. Harris, her father's close friend, while passing by an old bookstore on Cleveland's Main Street. He called her name, his voice trembling. "Emily, you look just like Mark." Then he handed her a small wooden box, worn down by time. "Your father wanted you to have this, but your mother never came to get it." When Emily opened the box, she found not only letters, but also a pocket watch engraved with the initials MP, some photos of her and her father at the park, and a small diary with simple notes, like "Emily likes red apples," and "Emily smiles when she hears the rain." At that moment, all the pieces in Emily's mind came together into a painful truth. Linda wasn't just cold-hearted. She had deliberately cut off every connection between Emily and her past, and her father's love. There were no more photos in the house. No more mention of Mark's name. The birth certificate was changed. And now, even the loving letters were hidden away. Emily shakily stepped into the living room, where Linda was sitting on the sofa watching the evening news. Emily's hand clenched the old letter until it was crumpled. She stood there, her voice breaking. "Why did you hide these letters? Why did you never let me know how much Dad loved me?" Linda didn't look up. She just took a sip of wine, her eyes cold and indifferent. "Mark is dead. You need to learn to live in the present. Richard is your legal father. Those letters would only make you weaker." That answer cut deep into Emily's heart like a knife. She burst into tears, her sobs overwhelming even the TV's sound. Each sob was choked and desperate, no longer able to hold back. She screamed, full of despair. "You didn't hit me! You erased me!" The atmosphere in the room froze. Richard came out from the kitchen, smirking as if all of this was some kind of joke. Linda stayed still, her face icy cold, showing no emotion. Emily collapsed to the floor, clutching the wooden box to her chest. In that moment, she realized her greatest pain wasn't from Richard's fists and kicks, but from the silence and indifference of her mother. A mother who didn't protect her, but instead erased her existence to build a new family her own way. That night, Emily went through the biggest crisis of her life. She laid the photo of her and her father on the floor, looked at the gentle smile in the picture, and whispered, "I'm not crazy. I was loved. Dad did love me." That was the first time Emily realized her true worth. She wasn't an invisible shadow in that cold house. She was Mark Parker's daughter, a man who once gave her his whole heart. And that truth, no one could erase. From that moment on, Emily's pain was no longer just a wound. It became a fire that burned away every fear, every silence, preparing her for the confrontations ahead. That morning, the Cleveland sky was gray, light snow blanketing the path to the family court. Emily walked slowly up the cold steps, clutching her leather briefcase containing everything she called the truth. Her heart raced not out of fear, but knowing this would be the day everything was decided. The courtroom door opened. The air inside was heavy, a mix of old wood, paperwork, and tension. On the other side, Linda sat upright, wearing a classy navy blue dress. Richard sat beside her, his face challenging, eyes bloodshot as if still feeling the after effects of alcohol. Between them sat their private lawyer, a salt-and-pepper-haired man with a smooth, sharp voice. Emily took a deep breath. She sat down next to her lawyer, who came from a nonprofit supporting abuse victims. The lawyer gently placed a hand on her shoulder, reassuring her, "We have the truth, and the truth always has power." The trial began. The gavel struck, the judge entered, his stern gaze sweeping both sides. The atmosphere thickened. Linda's lawyer stood first. He spoke confidently. "Your Honor, we want to emphasize that the plaintiff, Emily Parker, is overly sensitive and often exaggerates everything. These allegations of abuse and dishonesty are purely emotional, with no clear legal basis. She was even disciplined at school for psychological issues. Her accusations against her mother and stepfather are just attention-seeking." Whispers spread through the courtroom audience. Emily bowed her head, gripping the edge of the table tightly. But then, when it was her turn, she stood up, her eyes red but her gaze determined. "Your Honor, I would like to present the evidence." She opened her briefcase and placed each document on the table one by one. First is the birth certificate. She held it up in front of the judge's eyes. "My biological father's name, Mark Parker, was replaced with Richard Miller without my consent. This is a copy of the original birth certificate, stored at Cleveland Hospital, compared to the current one in the legal records. This is forgery. Next, she presented a file of scholarship documents. Letters from her high school confirmed she had been awarded a full scholarship, but the record was canceled due to false information on the birth certificate. I lost the chance to change my life because of this illegal interference. She placed a graduation photo on the table. In the class photo, Emily's seat was empty, even though she was one of the top students. I was kicked off the poetry team, the editorial board, and even stripped of class president because I was labeled mentally unstable, but the real reason was simply because I dared to speak the truth. Emily paused, took a breath, then continued. This is a memory card from a camera found in my bedroom. This device was installed by Richard, invading my privacy and threatening my safety. The courtroom was shaken. Richard jumped up, face flushed, ready to react, but was held back by his lawyer. Finally, Emily opened a wooden box and lifted letters from her father, her voice choked but clear. These are letters from Mark Parker, my biological father. He never abandoned me. He wrote to me, sent to me, but my mother, Linda, hid them all. She cut me off from my father's love, from the truth about my own family. The courtroom fell silent. No one breathed loudly. The judge carefully examined each piece of evidence, his expression growing serious. Linda, at this point, could no longer maintain her initial calm. She hung her head, her hands trembling as her lawyer whispered something to her. Richard muttered angrily, but everyone clearly saw he was on the back foot. The judge struck the gavel and spoke firmly. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, the court finds that Richard Miller committed domestic violence and violated privacy rights. Mr. Richard Miller will be subject to a restraining order against contacting Miss Emily Parker for 5 years. Any violation will result in criminal penalties. The gavel struck again, shaking the entire courtroom. Then the judge turned to Linda. As for Mrs. Linda Miller, the court confirms the act of document forgery, depriving her daughter's educational rights, and concealing personal information. She will be held responsible for reimbursing Emily Parker's scholarship and must publicly admit her wrongdoing in court. Emily's tears fell, but this time not from pain, but from a feeling like liberation. She was no longer a ghost, erased from the family. She had been heard, acknowledged, and seen. As everyone left the courtroom, Emily stayed behind, clutching the wooden box to her chest. She knew the road ahead was still full of challenges, but today, for the first time in years, she truly felt alive. Stepping out of the Cleveland family court, Emily thought it was all over. She had stood up, told the truth, and faced the mother who had abandoned her. But just hours later, she realized the trial was not the end, but the beginning of a series of long-buried truths. The phone in her coat pocket kept buzzing. At first, Emily thought it was just congratulatory messages from her lawyer or a few close friends, but when she opened it, she couldn't believe her eyes. The first message was from Nate, her half-brother, whom Emily had always thought was distant. Nate had been pampered by Linda, always with Richard, growing up in the full embrace Emily never had. "Sis, I believe you." Just 4 simple words, but they choked Emily up. She had thought Nate would always see her as a rebel, just a shadow in the family. Yet now, after everything, the boy who once turned his back was sending her a sign of trust. More messages kept coming. An old high school friend wrote, "Emily, I'm sorry. Back then, when you said Richard hit you, I didn't believe it. Watching the trial now, I feel so guilty." Emily read it with tears falling, not from sorrow, but because for the first time she felt understood. The phone kept lighting up with new messages. A neighbor from years ago said they had often heard shouting from Linda's house, but stayed silent out of fear of Richard. A classmate from the poetry club admitted that Emily was always an inspiration, but they didn't stand by her because they were afraid of being ostracized. The real twist came when her high school teacher, Miss Allen, called directly. Her voice trembled over the phone. "Emily, I'm sorry. Back then, when you accused Richard, I believed your mother. I thought you were just a child seeking attention. But today, after hearing all the evidence, I'm ashamed I didn't protect you. If I had believed you then, maybe things would have been different." Emily stayed silent, then whispered, "Thank you for saying that. I just want the truth." But the truth didn't end there. A few days later, Emily received a handwritten letter from a distant relative on her mother's side. In the letter, they revealed that Linda had done terrible things to more than just Emily. When she was younger, Linda had acted the same way toward her own sister. She exploited her took her assets, and cut off contact once it all came to light. Reading that, Emily was stunned. She suddenly realized she wasn't the only victim. Linda carried a pattern of manipulation, not just with her, but with anyone who might threaten her control. Emily had believed her story was unique, that she was the only child erased from the family picture by her mother. But now she saw that Linda had chosen this path long ago. One afternoon, sitting in a small corner cafe, Emily opened her email. Her inbox was filled with messages from strangers who all had one thing in common. They'd known Linda. They shared fragmented stories of coldness, lies, and times when Linda manipulated others for her own gain. These small pieces gradually formed a bigger picture. Linda hadn't just destroyed Emily's childhood. She had done it to many people. The only difference was that no one else had the courage to expose her. Emily sat there, hands trembling as she held her coffee cup, her heart heavy with turmoil. She recalls the night at 3 a.m., remembers her mother's cold gaze as she stood watching Richard beat her. At that moment she thought, I'm all alone in this world. But now, through letters, messages, and confessions, Emily realizes she was never truly alone. She takes a deep breath, feeling something inside her chest both collapse and release at the same time. The unexpected twist in life isn't new pain, but the realization that her pain was once shared, once witnessed, just hidden beneath a layer of silence. And from that, Emily comes to understand something else. If her mother had repeated the same kind of harm with many people, then Emily's courage to stand up is the start of a change. She's not just fighting for herself, but for all those who once stayed silent. As night falls over the city, Emily sits alone in her small new apartment. Outside the window, yellow streetlights cast their glow on the rain-soaked street. She opens her father's wooden box, pulls out a letter, and reads the shaky handwriting he once wrote. You will never be forgotten. You are my pride. For the first time in years, Emily smiles through her tears. She whispers, Dad, finally, I can see it. The twist of life isn't just the betrayal by her mother, but the arrival of truth, of faith, from those who seem to have turned their backs. Emily is no longer the erased child. She has become a living witness, a voice for all those who once stayed silent. After the trial, the atmosphere in Cleveland remains busy as usual, but for Emily, everything seems to have turned a new page. She had hoped for justice, and she got some of it. But the price Linda and Richard have to pay is just beginning to show. News about the case quickly spreads in the community. Local headlines read, Man accused of abusing stepchild banned from contact for 5 years. Richard once proudly boasted about being a successful businessman with contracts from construction companies in the suburbs. But after just 1 week, many partners began to pull out, one after another. Some called him directly, saying they didn't want their names tied to a family scandal. Richard gradually lost his reputation, and lucrative contracts fell away like autumn leaves. Linda didn't fare any better. She worked as an assistant at a dental office, where the image of dedication and trustworthiness was everything. When news of the trial and Emily's testimony spread, patients started canceling appointments. The mothers who once brought their kids there whispered among themselves that they didn't want to see Linda's face anymore. Just weeks later, the head dentist called Linda to the office and placed a resignation letter in front of her. The reason was simple: loss of community trust. But the biggest blow didn't come from work or money. It came from the looks from the neighbors. Linda used to be a put-together woman. Every morning, she'd drive the family car out of the garage with a polite smile. Now, every time she stepped outside, she felt dozens of eyes closing in on her. People didn't just know the story. They whispered and gossiped. Some avoided her, others didn't hide their disdain. In this small community, Linda had lost the most precious thing: respect. The family she once painted as the perfect American model was now shattered. Nate chose to leave the house and moved in with his aunt to escape the suffocating atmosphere. The suburban home, with walls full of pictures of Richard and Nate, now felt empty. In those frames, there was still no place for Emily, and now there was no room for lies either. But Linda still refused to let go. One evening, Emily found a letter in the mailbox outside her new apartment. The envelope had no sender, but the handwriting was familiar. When she opened it, Emily read the cold words, You destroyed the family. If you hadn't gone to court, we'd still be a perfect family. You're selfish, and now everyone has to pay the price. Emily's hand trembled slightly after reading, but not from fear. She gave a bitter smile. Years had passed, but her mother hadn't changed. She never admitted her mistakes, never apologized, never truly saw Emily as someone who deserved love. In Linda's eyes, the fault always belonged to someone else, even her own flesh and blood. Emily folded the letter and put it in the drawer. She knew she would never get a sincere apology, but that didn't matter anymore. The truth had been revealed. She saved herself, and now she was free. One morning, Emily stood on the balcony of her new apartment, watching the sunlight shine over the streets of Cleveland. No more shouting from Richard, no more cold stares from her mother, only the sounds of traffic, children laughing, and her own peaceful heartbeat. The consequences of truth can tear a family apart. But for Emily, it was the start of a new family, built not on blood, but on trust and freedom. Life after the trial wasn't easy for Emily. She didn't become a celebrated hero, nor did she instantly get a perfect life. But she stepped out of the darkness, and, more importantly, she found her own space. Emily rented a small apartment near downtown Cleveland. The room was just big enough for a bed, a wooden desk, and an old chair she bought at a thrift store. White walls, a window facing the busy street with honking cars. But to Emily, that was the sound of freedom. Every morning she woke up, brewed a cup of coffee, opened the window, and let the breeze in. No more yelling, no heavy footsteps, just the sound of her own breath. To make ends meet, Emily worked part-time at a small bookstore. The quiet shop smelled of old paper and pine wood. The job didn't pay much, but it gave her a sense of peace. Every time she organized the books on the shelves, Emily felt like she was putting the pieces of her life back in place. The shop owner, an older woman named Margaret, often smiled and said Emily had sad but strong eyes. That phrase made Emily realize that even if no one in her family ever acknowledged her, there were still people in the world who saw her worth. One day, while browsing online, Emily stumbled upon information about a support group for women who had faced abuse. At first she hesitated, weighed down by the fear of being judged and pitied. But after many nights of thinking, she decided to join. On the first day of the meeting, Emily sat in the corner of the room, listening to the other women share their stories. Some were controlled by their husbands, some were beaten by their fathers, some were threatened by their boyfriends. Hearing the tears fall, Emily felt she was no longer alone. And when it was her turn, her voice trembled, but she spoke. At 3 a.m. that day, I lay on the floor, blood flowing from my mouth, my leg broken. I begged my mother to save me, but she just stood and watched. The whole room fell silent. Emily didn't need their pity. She just needed them to understand. And when the nods appeared, she knew her story had been heard, had been shared. In the following weeks, Emily kept coming to the meetings. She not only told her story, but also listened, comforted, and embraced the women who were trembling just like she once did. She began writing down her experience, not as a wound, but as a recovery journal. Every line was a step away from the darkness. One autumn afternoon, Emily got a message from Juno, her best friend from high school. They used to be close, but after many family storms, Emily cut off contact. Now, Juno wrote, I've always believed in you, just waiting for you to come back. They met at a small cafe. Juno looked at Emily for a long time, then held her hand tightly. You don't have to suffer alone anymore. Those words untied the invisible chains in Emily's heart. Emily started allowing herself to open up to new people. At the bookstore, she chatted with regular customers. In the support group, she made friends with other strong women. For the first time, Emily felt she was building a new family, one that didn't need blood ties but was full of love. One night, Emily lay in bed, looking out the window. The room was dark, only moonlight shining through the curtains. She remembered the nights in the old house, when silence meant fear. But now, silence had a different meaning. She whispered inside, This silence is no longer scary. It's the peace I've chosen. Emily knew the journey was still long. Wounds don't just disappear overnight, but she found the strength to keep going, to turn her pain into a lesson, and to live a life she chose for herself. Emily's story isn't just a tragedy of a broken family, it's proof of a bigger truth. Family can betray you, but justice and truth can still save you. For years, Emily believed silence would protect her. She endured, swallowed it all inside, hoping that if she was quieter, less troublesome, the violence and coldness would disappear. But silence only deepened the wounds and gave more power to the abuser. The lesson Emily learned through blood and tears was that silence is never the answer. Only the truth, no matter how painful, can open the way out. Justice can come slowly. In Emily's case, it took many years, countless failures, and isolation before the truth was finally recognized. But when the truth came out, it had the power to tear apart the lies that had kept her trapped in darkness. The judge saw the evidence. And even though Linda tried to blame others, and Richard tried to cover up, justice was ultimately served. Emily also realized something else important. Healing doesn't depend on an apology. Because if you keep waiting for an apology from someone who never thought you deserved love, you'll stay stuck in pain forever. Linda never apologized, and probably never will, but that no longer matters. Emily's decision to stop waiting, to stop tying her happiness to words that never came, was the first step toward true healing. She learned to forgive, not to give Linda peace, but to free herself. Forgiveness in this case didn't mean forgetting, but refusing to let the past keep holding her prisoner. When Emily shared her story with support groups, when she wrote down the memories that once haunted her, she gradually turned her pain into strength. Emily's message to anyone in a similar situation is, speak up. Don't let silence become your chains. Reach out for help from friends, organizations, or your community. The truth can be hidden for a while, but it will never disappear. One day, the truth will win. And when it does, you'll realize you're much stronger than you ever thought. This story also reminds us that family doesn't always mean love. Some people are born into families full of control and betrayal, but that doesn't define your worth. You have the right to create your own family, made up of those who are willing to listen, love, and accept you. Emily found that family in her friends, in women who shared her struggles, in the hands that reached out when she thought she was alone. And that's something you can find too, if you have the courage to step out of the darkness. The story ends, but the message echoes on. If you've experienced betrayal from your own family, remember that truth and justice can save you. Silence can't protect you. Healing doesn't need an apology. It begins the moment you stop waiting for one. The final scene opens in a small park in Cleveland on a spring morning. The sky is clear blue, and the young trees are full of life. Emily sits by the pond, gently folding a white paper crane with her hands. When the crane is finished, she places it on the water, watching it drift along the gentle ripples. It's not just a piece of paper, it's a message, a way for Emily to let go of her pain and begin a new freedom. In a warm, calm voice, Emily leaves her final words. Silence never protects you, only the truth does. A short sentence, but one that deeply resonates with listeners. It's not just Emily's lesson, it's a message for anyone who's ever been through darkness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. Thank you for listening and being part of Crying Inside. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, share it with your loved ones, and leave a comment below. Every comment is not just interaction, it could be a lifeline for someone seeking understanding. Crying Inside will continue to bring heartfelt, real-life stories. Let's join together to spread the truth, so no one has to suffer in silence anymore.